We're going to look at the Middle Kingdom now. The Middle Kingdom sculpture undergoes a rather marked change from that of the Old Kingdom. It's less imposing, it's cruder, and in some senses more expressive. This is a portrait of Sesostris. It's a fragment, certainly, dating from around 1850 BC. It's quartzite, and it is only about 6.5 inches tall. Now, this portrait of Sesostris is a detail of a sphinx, and this clues us in on the age itself, on the Middle Kingdom itself. Sesostris differs from previous pharaohs in that he seems to have a somewhat troubled expression. Look at the furrowed brows. In Middle Kingdom times, the power of the pharaohs was diminished by feudalism. Local barons would usurp royal prerogatives and would increase poverty in turn. These factors in turn contributed to a decline in the arts. Now, as pharaonic power declined, what effect would that have on the populace? Now, think about this. Social order was of the highest religious importance in ancient Egypt. In this period, permanent and divine concepts were being questioned. In a sense, if the king is human, not all-powerful, what guarantees do I have? We see evidence of songs from the time encouraging people to grab at fleeting pleasures. This was not exactly the inspiration people needed to create lasting monuments, as was the case in the Old Kingdom. The New Kingdom marks perhaps the most brilliant period in Egyptian history. Intruders were expelled and Palestine and Syria were conquered. This was a great period which produced great art. The power of the pharaohs returned, but it was forever different. In the New Kingdom, the pharaohs were seen more as a source of administrative power. The king was even seen in the tombs of other officials who owed their function to his rule. This would never have taken place in the Old Kingdom. Amun-Re was a combination of the hidden god of the air with the sun god Re. People were made to focus more on the two gods as opposed to the great many that had been worshipped previously. It was important to focus the energy of the country. Now, while the role, power, and strength of the pharaohs has changed, we will find that their zest for building remained unabated. This is the funerary temple of Queen Hatshepsut, dating from 1478 to 1458 BC. And the temple of Queen Hatshepsut is one of the most impressive monuments of New Kingdom temples. While much like the rock-cut tombs of the Middle Kingdom, this is a much grander work. Now, Hatshepsut was not the first woman to govern Egypt, but she was by far the most exceptional. Two others had briefly governed, and some have even suggested that women took their place beside their husbands in this role. Nevertheless, Hatshepsut stood out for a number of reasons. First, she was the first woman to assume the godship alongside the kingship. Second, normally at death, the son of the pharaoh became pharaoh, but Hatshepsut ruled in her son's name for a time. But before long, she declared herself pharaoh. Third, she wore the double crown that signified Upper and Lower Egypt, whose unification we saw in the Palette of Narmer. And fourth, and perhaps best, she wore the traditional false beard of the pharaohs. That had to be nice. Now, Hatshepsut, unlike previous pharaohs, forsook battle, reopened trade routes, and she was important to Egypt for returning it to building great monuments. Now, Hatshepsut and her sons eventually practiced what's called name removals. If after her husband died she wanted to become pharaoh, she would go around to all the great things he had built, remove his name, and put hers in. After she was gone, her sons go around and do the same thing to her. So it becomes very confusing to study all of this and look at how, nope, it's mine, no, I did it, no, he did it, and so on. This is the temple of Ramses II from Abu Simbel. This has since been relocated from the 19th dynasty, dating from around 1275 to 1225 BC. Each of these figures stands approximately 65 feet tall. Now, Akhenaten, whose revolution we'll look at shortly, preceded Ramses II as pharaoh. Now this is important in assessing Ramses' place in history. With good reason, Ramses II is probably thought to be the greatest builder in Egyptian history. However, some of his works were rebuilding temples that were desecrated during Akhenaten's reign. Nevertheless, this colossal monument carved in situ is quite clearly meant to sing homage to the greatness of the pharaoh. Methinks thou dost protest too much? Post-Akhenaten, in a sense, as pharaonic power had once again been diminished under Akhenaten. The broad treatment and squat proportions here are employed to ensure the structural stability of the monument. This probably had the unfortunate effect of introducing the concept of coarse and hasty work among some of the artists, and that in turn contributed to a downfall of Egyptian art that corresponded to the coming end of the empire. Let's go inside the temple of Ramses II at Abu Simbel. These pillar statues inside are approximately 32 feet high, about half what we saw outside. Inside Ramses II's temple, hundreds of figures of the king function as columns. These figures as column here are perhaps the earliest example of this form of sculpture/architecture. What we have here is called an Atlantid, Atlantid, and an Atlantid is a male figure as a column. A female figure as a column is called a caryatid. That's Caryatid. This is the Pylon Temple of Horus, begun around 235 BC or 1235 BC, I'm sorry. Temples were not only built for strictly mortuary reasons. The Pylon Temple of Horus was built for one of their gods. Obelisks in a courtyard occupied an important part in the layout of this particular design, as plans for this temple indicate. This is a hypostyle hall, and this is from the Temple of Amun-Re from the 19th dynasty. That's 1275 to 1225 BC. A hypostyle hall is one having a roof supported by columns. No cement was used in the construction here. Only the weight of the huge stones held the columns in place. Now, a clerestory is formed by having central columns of greater height than the flank columns. This raising of the roof permitted a clerestory that allowed light to flood the hall.